When people hear the phrase the most brutal empire in history, they usually expect exaggeration. They expect shock value. They expect selective storytelling. They expect history exaggerated for entertainment. But brutality is not defined by how violent something appears. It is defined by how violence is organized, who it is directed at, and what remains once it is finished. Many empires killed. Many empires destroyed cities. Many empires ruled through fear. That alone does not make them the worst. The real question is this: which empire turned brutality into a system, applied it consistently across continents, and left damage so deep that entire regions never fully recovered? When examined honestly, there is only one answer: the Mongol Empire. This is not a story of legend or reputation. It is an examination of structure, policy, and consequence. And once the evidence is laid out, defending this empire becomes impossible. Reason 1: mass extermination was official policy. Most empires killed people during war. The Mongols planned extermination before war even began. Under Genghis Khan, Mongol warfare followed a rigid and non-negotiable doctrine. Immediate surrender meant survival. Any resistance meant total destruction. This was not symbolic language. It was enforced consistently and deliberately. Once a city resisted, even briefly, its fate was sealed. Even if surrender followed later, mercy did not return. Entire male populations were executed in organized mass killings. Women and children were enslaved, displaced, or killed. Cities were burned, dismantled, or erased. There was no distinction between soldier and civilian once resistance occurred. Other empires punished rebellion to reassert authority. The Mongols destroyed entire populations to eliminate the future. This is a critical distinction. When extermination becomes automatic rather than conditional, brutality stops being situational. It becomes systemic. Reason 2: civilians were deliberately targeted. Most empires focused violence on enemy armies. Civilian deaths were tragic consequences, not primary objectives. The Mongols reversed this logic completely. They understood a brutal reality. Armies fight wars. Populations decide whether wars ever return. So populations became the target. Men were executed not because they fought, but because they existed. Women and children were enslaved or removed to destroy continuity. Entire family lines ended in a single campaign. This was not accidental damage. It was intentional demographic destruction. By eliminating civilians, the Mongols eliminated economic recovery, social cohesion, future resistance. This is not standard warfare. This is the destruction of society itself. Reason 3: terror was systematic, not spontaneous. The Mongols did not rely on fear accidentally. They engineered it. After destroying a city, Mongol commanders often allowed survivors to escape. This was not mercy. It was strategy. These survivors carried precise information: how resistance was punished, how many were killed, how surrender would have prevented it. Fear traveled faster than any Mongol army. Entire regions surrendered without battle, not because of negotiation, but because resistance guaranteed annihilation. At this point, the Mongols were no longer conquering territory. They were controlling decisions before battles even began. When fear replaces choice, terror becomes governance. No empire before or after relied on psychological domination this efficiently. Reason 4: destruction was designed to be permanent. Many empires destroyed cities. The Mongols destroyed recovery. They deliberately targeted irrigation canals, agricultural systems, skilled labor populations. In regions like Persia and Central Asia, irrigation systems built over centuries were dismantled deliberately. Without water, agriculture collapsed. Cities emptied. Land turned into desert. Some regions never returned to their pre-Mongol population levels even centuries later. This was not short-term devastation. It was long-term ecological and economic destruction. Most empires wanted conquered land to produce wealth. The Mongols were willing to turn land into wasteland if it ensured obedience. That decision alone places them in a different category. Reason 5: the scale of brutality was unprecedented. Scale matters when judging brutality. The Mongol extermination system was applied across East Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East, Eastern Europe. This was not a single campaign or isolated massacre. It was repeated again and again for decades. Entire regions experienced mass depopulation, urban collapse, cultural destruction. Cities that had existed for centuries disappeared permanently. No earlier empire inflicted such systematic destruction across such a vast geographic area in such a short time. When extermination becomes routine rather than exceptional, comparison collapses. Reason 6: speed multiplied the destruction. The Mongol military was the fastest force of its era. Speed removed options. Cities had little time to prepare defenses, evacuate civilians, negotiate terms. Rushed decisions created panic. Panic led to resistance. Resistance triggered extermination. This created a deadly feedback loop. Speed caused fear. Fear caused resistance. Resistance caused annihilation. The faster the Mongols advanced, the more often total destruction occurred. Speed did not reduce suffering, it magnified it. Reason 7, there were no legal or moral limits. Other empires developed restraints over time. Legal systems, religious protections, political traditions. The Mongol system recognized one rule: obedience. There were no protected civilian classes, no sacred cities immune from destruction, no legal limits once resistance occurred. Once defiance happened, extermination followed automatically. No appeal, no exception. When there are no limits, brutality has no ceiling. Reason 8, the damage lasted long after the empire collapsed. The worst empires are judged not only by what they destroy, but by what remains afterward. In many Mongol-conquered regions, population recovery took centuries. Cities permanently declined. Cultural and scientific centers vanished. Some regions never fully recovered. The empire collapsed. The damage did not. This long-term devastation is one of the strongest reasons historians consider the Mongol Empire uniquely destructive. How the Mongols became this way. This brutality did not appear suddenly. The Mongols emerged from constant tribal warfare, a survival culture where mercy meant weakness, absolute loyalty to leadership. When this culture expanded into empire, violence scaled instead of being restrained. Empire did not civilize the Mongols, it amplified their methods. Comparison why other empires do not match this. Rome integrated conquered populations. The Assyrians used terror but regionally. Later empires killed more but over longer periods. The Mongols combined extermination as policy, civilian targeting, psychological warfare, speed, permanent destruction. No other empire combined all 5 consistently. Conclusion: why this empire was worse than you think. The Mongol Empire was not the most brutal because it was violent. It was the most brutal because violence was policy, terror was governance, extermination was conditional rule, destruction was permanent. This was not chaos, it was design. And that is why, by any serious historical standard, the Mongol Empire stands as the most brutal empire in history. Worse than most people think. If you want history explained without myths and without comfort, subscribe to Forgotten Empire, because some empires are remembered for what they built. Others are remembered for what they erased.